The first Magic the Gathering double-faced cards were introduced in the Innistrad block, and then they came back in Magic Origins with Flip Planeswalkers. But the cards that I'm interested in talking about today are the transforming double-faced cards that turn into important landmarks. And so these were brought back in Ixalan and Rivals of Ixalan, but were also revisited in Lost Caverns of Ixalan. I'm actually a huge fan of these cards, and I'm always surprised to see just how unpopular they are in relation to the strength of the lands once they're actually flipped over. The other thing that I really like about these cards is they're essentially like bonus ramp, because outside of your set land count and maybe a few MDFCs, these have a good ability on the front, but once they're transformed, it's like you hit another land ramp that turn, even though you slotted it into your deck as a non-land card. Before we do get into the cards, I want to shout out Vibrant Toucan, who is a patron based out of Germany. Their favorite commander is Trotta Deadly Fugitive, and a favorite pet card / underplayed card of theirs is Blood Frenzy, which is only in 1.4k decks. That's awesome, I love that card. Outside of Magic the Gathering, they love board games. And yeah, thanks so much Vibrant Toucan for being a patron. Your support really does mean a lot. As is typical with my videos, I'm going to dive into the honorable mentions. And what's interesting about this is that the available pool of cards is a lot smaller than usual. So I'm actually going to include some honorable mentions that are a little more popular than I usually pull when it comes to honorable mentions. I usually try and stick sub 40k, but in this case I am going to dip a little higher. The first honorable mention is Dowsing Dagger, which is in 55,000 decks, but that's still only 0.79% of decks that can actually play this because it is colorless. From an ability standpoint, the creating 2 defender tokens for a player is pretty much a non-factor and can even be used from a politics perspective. If someone needs some extra blockers against an aggro deck, you can make a friend and maybe they'll let you attack and flip this card. Once it is transformed, having a land that gives 3 mana for the rest of the game is so strong, especially with how few, targeted land removal people run these days. The next honorable mention is Storm the Vault, which has put so many games away for me in my Galazeth Prismari deck, and also in my Malcolm the Eyes deck. If you deal combat damage to each opponent in 1 turn, that's 3 treasures right there, and they come in untapped. And when it transforms, it's pretty much like having a Guy's Cradle, but for the number of artifacts you control, which can easily get higher than your creature count. It doesn't even tap your artifact tokens, so if you have, let's say, 10 artifacts, that's 10 mana right there, plus another 10 that Galazeth can tap for X spells or big spells. It's absolutely a house in artifact decks. Up next is Legion's Landing, which is a 1-drop that creates a 1/1 vampire with lifelink. When it transforms, you have to be attacking with 3 or more creatures, but when it does transform, it gives 1 white mana, and you can tap it and pay some mana to create 1/1 tokens with the lifelink. But yeah, it's great. It's low to the ground. It works in aggro decks. It can get a token with lifelink down on turn 1, and being able to transform it early on or even in the late game super easily is just a great dependable ramp for go wide or aggro decks. The last honorable mention is Journey to Eternity, which enchants one of your creatures and brings it back to the battlefield untapped when it dies. As a transformed card, you can tap it for any color, or you can pay 5 and tap it to return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. So the death/board wipe insurance is nice, and having a recursion to the battlefield with no stipulation tied to it as just a mana sink tied onto a land is just great to have around. And I will say shout out to Thematic Compass and Search for Ascanta, which are 2 others I'm not actually covering today, but I think they are worth mentioning. But with that being said, if there are any cards you like today, the prices are in the description, and it would mean a lot if you do use the TCG Player affiliate link in the description below. But either way, thanks for being here. Okay, now on to the more in-depth talk. First, we have the Everflowing Well, which is in 26,163 decks. This card is a 3-mana legendary artifact that costs 2 generic and 1 blue. It says, when the Everflowing Well enters the battlefield, mill 2 cards, then draw 2 cards. Then for a Descend 8 ability, it says, at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, transform the Everflowing Well. And so once it transforms, it now becomes the Myriad Pools, which is a legendary artifact land that taps for 1 blue. And it says, whenever you cast a permanent spell using mana produced by the Myriad Pools, up to one other target permanent you control becomes a copy of that spell until end of turn. So yeah, first of all, it's crazy to say that this set came out almost 2 years ago. The reason why I bring that up is because I bought a set booster box when it came out and I opened one of these cards. When I read it, the first part, I was like, okay, yeah. I actually just stopped reading it once I saw the Descend 8 requirement because, I wrote it off as I don't play any graveyard decks. I didn't even care to read the flip side to see what the land actually does. I'm actually now a huge fan of this. Yes, I don't play it in my Spellslinger heavy decks, but this can fit into a lot more decks than I initially gave it credit for when I was reading this a couple years ago. First of all, this card mills 2, so it can help get you closer to that Descend 8 requirement. I have no idea why I thought it was like a draw 2, discard 2 cards. Maybe I'm just so used to that kind of phrasing. But worst case scenario, this is a mill 2, draw 2 for 3 mana, which is kind of the going rate for drawing 2 cards. The second thing that is a bummer is that it only counts permanents as opposed to just cards in general. But this works very well in any deck that fills the graveyard or even in like creature decks. So after the first board wipe or mid game, you're likely already pretty close to this requirement. But of course, this actually is just best in decks that put lands and put things into your graveyard. Once it is flipped, the ability is an absolute banger. You can turn any clue token into a huge creature and essentially give it haste, or if it already has haste, even better. I've even used this to sacrifice the original legendary creature that I cast before to the legend rule in order to be able to attack that same turn and wipe someone out. And maybe I needed that attack trigger this turn right now. So even having that flexibility of creating or making a copy of a legendary creature and giving it haste and sacrificing the original, that is still there. Or maybe you can double up some enchantments or artifacts like a Simulacrum Synthesizer to create 2 constructs in 1 turn for every 1 artifact that enters. If you do have any permanent untappers, this just gets even better to create multiple copies. And the last thing that I will say that can be good but also bad is that this card is an artifact land. So this means it counts for any affinity cards or things that care about the total number of artifacts that you own, but that also means that people can just use spot removal on the land. Either way, this is all just bonus from the initial pay 3, draw 2 that comes as a baseline for casting this spell. Next up is Hadana's Climb, which is in 24,161 decks. This is a 3-mana legendary enchantment that costs 1 generic, 1 green, and 1 blue. It says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then, if that creature has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, transform Hadana's Climb. And so once it does transform, it then becomes Winged Temple of Vraska, which is a legendary land, so not a legendary artifact land. It taps to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, or you can pay 1 generic, 1 green, 1 blue, and tap it. And it says target creature you control gains flying and gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is its power. Great. I love that. So first of all, dissecting this card activates at the beginning of combat. So this means that you can get instant value instead of waiting until the end step, or even worse, your upkeep. So a lot of times, it checks for the upkeep, which means that it has to survive an entire turn cycle before it can flip or give you the +1/+1 counter. So the fact that this triggers right at combat is great. This works with +1/+1 counter decks, and this means that you can transform it the turn that it comes down because it can piggyback off of the progress you have made on putting counters onto a creature already. So if a creature already has 2 +1/+1 counters, you can play this in your first main phase, give it another counter when your combat phase starts, and boom, you now have a land that taps for any color. If you are playing in a deck with access to red, this works with extra combats as well, if you do play those cards. And then in terms of the actual land itself, that activated ability is very strong. Like doubling up a creature's power and giving it flying for 3 and a tap is no joke. You know, how about a flying 24/24 Galta with flying and trample? Yes, please. The ability can also be activated at instant speed, so it's not crazy to imagine a scenario where an opponent sees you have no flyers on the board and totally forgets that your land can give your creature double its power and flying at instant speed to block and kill their flying attacker. This card has been around for a minute, so I'd love to hear if you have played this card before, and if so, what did you think of it? Our third card today is Dowsing Device, which is in 21,481 decks. This is a 2-mana artifact that costs 1 generic and 1 red, and it says, whenever Dowsing Device or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, up to 1 target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. Then transform Dowsing Device if you control 4 or more artifacts. So when you transform it, it turns into Geode Grotto, which is a land cave. It adds 1 red, or you can pay 2 generic, 1 red, and tap it. And it says, until end of turn, target creature gains haste and gets +X/+0, where X is the number of artifacts you control. Activate only as a sorcery. Can someone actually remind me if I have covered this in a past video? Like, I don't think so, but I've been a fan of this card for a long time, before it was in even 10,000 decks, so honestly wouldn't doubt if I've already talked about this in another video, but yeah, if I did, I can retell you why I love this card. So first of all, it's great because this has an ETB effect for itself, and for every other artifact that enters under your control, which is not just limited to 1 or more, or when 1 artifact, enters. I think artifact fall is just so much more sparse than I thought it would be. So when you partner it with cards like one that I mentioned last video, Officious Interrogation, you could reasonably create 15 clue tokens and give 1 creature +15/+0 in haste, or you could give 15 creatures +1/+0 in haste, or any combination in between. Second, I think haste is just in general a busted keyword. So +1/+0 and haste for 2 mana is already pretty nice, even before you take into account that it works for other artifacts entering too. Number 3, I like that it checks upon the resolution of the ability as opposed to a set time in the turn cycle. So for example, it doesn't wait until the start of combat, it doesn't wait until the end step or your upkeep. This means that you could create a treasure at instant speed and transform this into a land to suddenly unlock 1 more mana for a spell. And once it is flipped, giving +X, where X is the number of artifacts that you control, can just put away games very easily. Having that in your back pocket is great because no one knows what creatures you have in your hand that suddenly become huge threats when they have access to haste and getting like +10/+0 with the number of artifacts that you have on the board. The last thing that I will say, this is a cave. That hasn't ever really mattered for me because I don't play any cave decks, but I know that that is a thing, and so if you do have any cave decks, then this is just like a little added bonus that you could keep in mind. If you are new here or you're a longtime viewer, I'd love to invite you to join our Patreon Discord for amazing discussions on hidden gems and unknown bombs. Also, if you do join, you will make it in time for the Baldur's Gate Collector Booster patron giveaway that I'll run in our next video. Our next card today is Golden Guardian, which is in 16,647 decks. This is a 4-mana artifact creature golem that has Defender It's 4/4, and it has an ability where you pay 2 generic, and it says Golden Guardian fights another target creature you control. When Golden Guardian dies this turn, return it to the battlefield transformed under your control. Once it is transformed, the backside is Goldforge Garrison, which is a land that taps to add 2 mana of any 1 color to your mana pool, or you can pay 4 generic and tap it to create a 4/4 colorless golem artifact creature token. That's a lot. But yeah, there's a few things that I love about this card, and which I actually think make it a lot better than it seems when people actually read it. So the first, while you do play this with having the intention of flipping it, having access to like a 4/4 defender as a base is not a bad stat line to have in the first place. Number 2, a misconception about this card is people likely think that you need a creature that can defeat Golden Guardian in a fight, which would limit this to commanders that are 5/5 or at least play a lot of big creatures that wouldn't die to a 4/4 in a fight. But that's not the case. As per the rulings of this card, it says once Golden Guardian's activated ability has resolved, it will return to the battlefield transformed if it dies for any reason in that turn. So this means that you can pay 2, have it fight a 1/1 token, then sacrifice this to like an Ashnod's Altar to refund the fight cost. Then you now have access to a land that taps for 2 mana of any 1 color. So with that being said, I'm surprised this isn't played in more mono black or Orzhov decks that can easily kill it with a sacrifice outlet whenever you want. The third thing that is nice is that, similar to Dowsing Device, this isn't limited to sorcery speed, so you could transform it into a land on any given turn to get access to a land that taps for 2 mana. So let's say there's multiple creatures attacking you. You could block with Golden Guardian and a 1/1 token. After you've declared those blockers, you can then pay 2 to have it fight your 1/1 token. The token dies, and the creature it's blocking stays blocked, assuming that it doesn't have trample. Then if Golden Guardian dies to the attacker, it will come back as an untapped land, and both of the attackers would deal no damage to you. If you've never seen this card before, I actually wouldn't doubt if we start to see it more often as more anti-venom horrifying healer decks start to pop up, because this will transform Golden Guardian with the fight, and this will turn anti-venom into a 9/9. Oh, and yeah, I totally forgot about the golem aspect. Yeah, you can create a 4/4 golem artifact creature token as a mana sink if you'd like to. That's great for dedicated golem decks, which do exist, and is probably the reason why Bernard Ginger Sculptor is one of the top commanders that's playing this. We've got 3 more, and Conqueror's Galleon is next, which is played in 14,068 total decks. This is a 4 mana artifact vehicle that costs just 4 generic, and it says when Conqueror's Galleon attacks, exile it at end of combat, then return it to the battlefield transformed under your control. It has Accrue 4 and the stat line is 210. Once it is transformed, it becomes Conqueror's Foothold, which is a land that can tap to add colorless to your mana pool. You could pay 2 and tap it to draw a card, then discard a card. You could pay 4 and tap it to draw a card, or you could pay 6, tap it, and return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So yeah, I think a few things about this card. 1, being a vehicle now has a lot more support than it ever has, especially in comparison to when this card was released. There's just so many ways to bypass the Accrue 4 ability and just turn it into a creature without the Accrue 4, like with a free Accrue or some other way. What is nice about this card is that it doesn't even have to deal damage to an opponent, it simply just has to attack. So let's say it gets chump blocked, you'll still get the land. And if it does happen to get blocked, having a 210 stat line means that it's very rarely going to die from combat damage. And even though Conqueror's Galleon becomes tapped when it attacks, the rules specify that it does come back into play untapped as a land. From the land side, I will say none of these abilities by themselves are really amazing. They're all pretty expensive, but having access to all 3 of them on a single land is just an excellent bonus and a pretty viable mana sink for bluffing interaction. You could draw a discard to filter your hand. You could get just pure card draw, or you have access to regrowth's ability stapled onto a land that is likely never going to get removed. Like I said, it's not the most efficient rates, but it's better than having access to a land or artifact that just taps for mana. And so I like the flexibility that this card brings for the strategies of your deck. Our second to last card today is Azor's Gateway, which is in 13,482 decks. This costs 2 generic for a legendary artifact that has pay 1 generic and tap it to draw a card, then exile a card from your hand. If cards with 5 or more different converted mana costs are exiled with Azor's Gateway, you gain 5 life, untap Azor's Gateway, and transform it. Then once you have the transform land, it's Sanctum of the Sun, which is a legendary land that has tap. Add X of any one color to your mana pool, where X is your life total. Whoa, yeah, that's wild. I would definitely consider this to be the highest risk and highest reward card covered in this list today. At face value, it would take 5 turns to flip it, and by turn 3 or 4, someone could blow it up and you would lose access to the cards that you exiled, and it just would never flip. But I do think there are several ways, or also commanders, that can help lower the risk or the time that it takes to flip this card. So yeah, a few things. One, if you are playing this at face value and there are no ways to speed up the process, this card is not great. But I will say it's also not terrible. So this can help filter through your hand for value. In the early game, you could filter out high CMC cards that you wouldn't be able to cast for a long time. And in the late game, you can filter out cheap spells or rocks that are no longer relevant to your game plan. If your commander doesn't help with this, then I think the best approach would be to play this in decks that play a lot of other big artifact threats. So in the case where you're not playing against a sweeper, people will need to decide to get rid of either this 2 mana artifact or something like a Great Henge or a Simulacrum Synthesizer or like a Chimil the Inner Sun. But yeah, the idea is give them a lot of threats and a lot of options that they have to choose. Hey, you have to remove one of my artifacts, but the other ones are going to stick around, so which is the biggest threat to you? Of course, this just works better in commanders that can speed up the process of turning this over, because it is a huge payoff if you're able to flip it. But unlike a lot of cards of this kind, it doesn't use counters, so proliferate doesn't work, which means that you'll likely have to just go with a commander that can straight up flip it, like Tetsun Gnome Champion, who can transform another double-faced artifact when it enters or attacks, or play a commander that can untap it. I was actually surprised that Derevi Imperial Tactician isn't even in the top 25 of commanders playing this card, because Derevi can very easily untap this a lot to speed up the process. Most of the top commanders revolve around life gain, so people are caring more about the payoff once it is flipped as opposed to getting it there. Yorith of the Healing House also plays a lot of untap abilities that could probably flip this in just a few turns. But yeah, once you actually do flip the card, the question is if you can actually take advantage of that much mana. Maybe you're in a Spellslinger deck that can chain a ton of spells due to the high card draw and cantrip effects. I think that this card would be a great candidate in decks where the commander itself has a repeatable mana sink ability. Even though I don't play any of these, I'm talking, the Kinnins, the Kenriths, or the Sir Conrads of the world, or even something like Una, Queen of the Fae. It would be a shame, you went through all this effort to actually flip it, and once you do, you have nothing to use all of this bonus mana on. But I'm curious, what commanders have your favorite mana sink abilities that could benefit from having access to, let's say, 30 or 40 mana? Well, we are down to our last card today, and that's Grasping Shadows, which is in 5,622 decks. This card came from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. It's a 4 mana enchantment that costs 3 generic and 1 black, and it says, whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gains Death Touch and Lifelink until end of turn. Put a Dread counter on Grasping Shadows. Then if there are 3 or more Dread counters on it, transform it. Then once it's transformed, it's Shadow's Lair, which is a land cave that taps to add 1 black. Or you could pay 1 black and tap it to remove a dread counter from Shadow's Lair. You draw a card and you lose 1 life. This one is an interesting one. You know, when I read it, I like the keywords that it grants, but then I think, man, I'm limited to attacking with just 1 creature to get the benefit. But when it actually comes down to it, I'm not trying to swing out at the whole board every single turn to try and win the game. So it's actually a lot more common than I gave it credit for to just swing with 1 or 2 creatures, then leave up blockers while everyone else is also building their board states, and to not call attention to yourself. Because I mean, if you're swinging out with 5+ creatures every single turn, you're going to quickly catch the board's attention and label yourself as dangerous. But when you just swing with 1 creature, it's pretty easy to go unnoticed while you're also slowly building up your life total as well. Unlike the card before this actually does use counters, so it can be proliferated. And as I said, I do like the keywords that it grants. Death Touch prevents important or big creatures from blocking, and a few swings with lifelink can actually make a huge difference in the game in terms of who makes it down to the end. Then, you know, there are decks as well that actually care about creatures attacking alone. This could be a natural fit in a Squall Seed Mercenary deck, who grants double strike to a lonely attacker and recurs creatures with CMC 3 or less from your graveyard when Squall is the one that dealt the damage. Neferox, Overlord of Grixis, has flying, exalted, an ability that makes defending players sacrifice a creature when it attacks alone. Or you could go with the new Spider-Man Noir, who also incentivizes creatures attacking alone by giving them a +1/+1 counter and surveilling X, where X is the number of counters on that creature. Once you actually flip this card, this has the cheapest ability shown today, where you can just pay 1 black mana and tap the land to draw a card and lose 1 life. That's great. You know, who doesn't want to just have access to be able to draw cards for 2 mana? It's a pretty simple card that I think can garner consideration if you are playing any sort of Voltron deck that has black in it. But yeah, that's everything that I had today. I'd love to hear what you think of these videos, and if you have ever played with any of these flip lands, what have you thought about them? And also let me know if I did miss any of your favorites, but I'd love to hear if there are any cycles or cards or, you know, sets, mechanics, whatever it is that you'd like to see covered in one of these videos. I do actually read everyone's comments, and those are typically the inspiration for the videos that I create. So please let me know what you think. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you all and hope to see you next time.